All right, welcome to a new series. We're going to call this Route 66. I want to go through every book of the Bible, Lord willing. And so this is going to be really a kind of Bible survey. And part of the purpose of this is I want you to have and grow in a working knowledge of the Bible. One thing that I think is helpful is that you have a reading strategy for each book of the Bible so that when you start a new book, you kind of know what to look for. You know the lay of the land. As you seek to lead yourself, as you seek to lead your family and others, we want to be more confident in the terrain of each book of the Bible. I've got a friend of mine who's in special forces, and I remember him training to learn how to do land navigation. And he had to figure out how to use a compass and a map, and they would put them in different situations, and they had to figure out where they were and how to navigate that land and figure out how to get to certain checkpoints. And so really you could think of this series as like basic land navigation through the Bible. So think about getting parachuted into one of the 66 books of the Bible, and that's the terrain you're in, and you want to be able to quickly orient yourself and not panic and figure out where you are in the Bible, in the storyline, and be able to benefit from that. Also, you want to be able to help others navigate their way through this book of the Bible and others in the series. So today, we start with the first book, the book of Genesis. Really, Genesis is the book of beginnings, the book of beginnings. It's the book of covenants, or the book of generations, we might say. Who is the author of Genesis? Moses is the author of Genesis. He's also the author of the rest of the Torah. We also call it the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of our Bibles. And if someone says that someone else other than Moses wrote it, then run. Moses is clearly the author here. Only those who are liberals and reject what we understand the Bible's inspiration, they reject Mosaic authorship, but it is very plain, very evident that Moses wrote these first 5 books. He wrote this around 1446, around those years, BC. And Genesis really describes the origin of the human race, the introduction of sin into the world, the confusion of languages, and God's choice of Israel based on promises that were made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Really, Genesis sets the trajectory for the rest of the Bible. So if you don't pay attention to Genesis, you'll be very confused later in the Bible. Imagine if you miss the first 15 minutes of a movie in the theater, and you walk in. You got your popcorn, you got your soda, but you miss those first 15 minutes. Well, you'd probably be confused for the rest of the movie. You'd miss some key information that you needed for the rest of the movie. Well, the entire Torah really sets up the paradigms you will need to understand for later books. I like to think about, especially the first 5 books of Moses, as like learning basic mathematics. Addition, subtraction, division, multiplication. If you don't learn those principles, then when you get later in math, it's going to be very difficult. You're going to get lost very quickly. And so if you don't learn the basic paradigms and concepts that are established in Genesis, as well as Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and even some of the other early historical books, then when you get into the prophets, it's going to get confusing. The prophets are somewhat like calculus. They are pulling on a lot of information from past revelation, and you have to be aware of what they're doing. So pay attention in these early books especially. Let me give you some examples of how later concepts laid down in Genesis will get picked up in later parts of Scripture. A really obvious one is in Genesis 2, the concept of the Sabbath, or the rest that God establishes on the 7th day. Of course, Israel is given a Sabbath that's related to that, but it introduces us to this concept of rest, and it's all over the Scriptures. It gets picked up even in the book of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 4, and God's intention for us to have an Edenic rest. Think about the book of Revelation. There's things in Revelation that you'll be confused about if you don't grasp certain things in the book of Genesis. Think about all these judgments that happen in Revelation. You have seals, bowls, trumpets, not in that order. Seals, then trumpets, then bowls. Then the trumpet judgments, though, some have pointed out that they are in the reverse order of the days of creation. You might say, well, why is that significant? Well, it's as if John is trying to show us that what is happening during the tribulation, especially in the trumpet judgments, is a decreation. God is decreating the world. Why would he do that? Well, he's preparing for a new creation, which we see later in the book of Revelation. Or think about Revelation 12. In Revelation 12, there's this interesting kind of imagery that's given in Revelation 12. And it begins this way. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And you think, who is this woman? Who is she? How could we possibly know? Well, actually, in Genesis 37, Joseph has some dreams. And in his dream, he recounts how there were stars and the moon, and there's sun, moon, and these stars, and clearly, let's see here, verse 9 of chapter 37. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." So here is the initial imagery for what John is using. What does this tell us? Well, the woman is Israel. The woman represents Israel because of how Joseph received this dream. It refers to the 12 tribes. It's really what Joseph is seeing. So we're not hopeless in understanding the symbols of Revelation. We just have to be paying attention to where those symbols are coming from. They're coming from prior revelation. I think Revelation is so difficult because we haven't paid attention to other books of the Bible that are setting up for it. Or think about another thing in Revelation. Why is Satan released after the 1,000-year millennial kingdom in Revelation 20? Well, really, it is to prove that the problem of evil has truly been dealt with fully and finally, that we're not going to have another fall. Really, you have the last Adam, the Lord Jesus, who has reigned successfully over the creation, which Adam failed to do. And now, at the end of that time, the question is, could it happen again? And Satan is released to deceive the nations. And so what did Satan do in the beginning in Genesis 3? He sought to deceive our first parents. Now it's even bigger. It's all of the nations. And what do you have happen? It's shut down immediately. And you cannot defeat the second Adam. And so the fall will never happen again. The problem of evil has been fully and finally dealt with and vanquished. It cannot happen again. Or think about Paul in Romans 5, verse 12. He sets up that Adam is a real man created by God as a representative for the human race. And Paul says that Christ is a new man representing his people. And so that's really significant to understand. Back to Revelation. Satan is called the dragon in Revelation. And you're like, whoa, who's this dragon? Well, it's connected with a Leviathan, a creature in Isaiah 27, which is also parallel with the serpent that we are introduced to in Genesis 3:1. So it's all coming back. It's these ancient images that we're seeing. So God is showing, really, from beginning in this book, that he's going to fulfill what he started in the beginning. That showdown between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent is going to be completed in the end in Revelation. And so the first book of the Bible and last book of the Bible actually connect seamlessly. And of course, there's many other connections to Genesis and other books of the Bible. So those are some of the significant connections. What is the purpose of this book? Why did God give us this book in the Bible? Well, it's to show that God begins. God begins. It's the book of beginnings. That's really what Genesis means. And really, the book begins in the beginning. And so it's what God is starting. What is the structure of this book? Or how would we outline this book? How is Moses developing his message? Well, actually, he does it through the means of this phrase that's often translated in English. It goes like this: these are the generations of. These are the generations of. You first see it in chapter 2, verse 4. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth. Then in chapter 5, verse 1, this is the book of the generations of Adam. And then you see it in chapter 6, verse 9. These are the generations of Noah. Then 10, verse 1. These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. You then see it in chapter 11, verse 10. 11, verse 10. These are the generations of Shem. Then in verse 27 of the same chapter, now these are the generations of Terah. And then in chapter 25, you have this same pattern again. Chapter 25, verse 12. It says, these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son. And then in verse 19, these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. And then in chapter 36, verse 1, these are the generations of Esau, that is Edom. And then in verse 9, these are the generations of Esau, the father of the Edomites. And then finally in chapter 37, verse 2, these are the generations of Jacob. And what you'll find later in the book especially is that it's what follows that person. So, take, for instance, chapter 37, verse 2, these are the generations of Jacob. Well, it's actually introducing the story of Joseph, who is one of the children of Jacob. And so this is Moses' structure. This is the structure that he gave for the book. It's the Hebrew word toledot, and it really means generations, or it means genealogies. And so Moses is structuring his book in a way that focuses on generations of people or genealogies. And you think, well, that's kind of boring. Why would he do that? I don't like genealogies. But it actually fits perfectly with the purpose of this book about God's beginnings. And what is God doing? Well, of course, we're going to look in a moment that he creates the world. He sets up man as a ruler, but man sins and fails in that task. So God makes a promise that the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent, this promised seed. And so the rest of Genesis, and really the rest of the Old Testament, is like a big search for who is the seed. And so it would make sense in this first book, where we get the first gospel promise that there is this one coming, this individual man, this seed of the woman, that we would then be on a search for him. And so Moses even structures his book to show us that here's this generation, here's that generation. That's why he gives us this structure, so that we are attuned to what he's trying to do, that we are following and looking for the figure who will undo the curse. And so he's tracing a line, or he's tracing a lineage. And really, Genesis becomes a process of elimination. And I don't know if you've played the game Guess Who, but you've got these different faces, men and women, and with different features, and the one person guesses, is your person a male? Okay, and then if it is yes, then you put down all the females. Does your person have a mustache? And then if they don't have a mustache, then you put the people with the mustaches down. Okay, so that's how you do it. And your process of elimination until you get to the person who they have, and then you guess, is it this person? Well, that's what Genesis is about. It is really about tracing this line. It's a process of elimination. Who is the seed of the woman in Genesis 3:15? And it's a quest to find the one. A lot of movies are like this. Who is the one? You have this figure, this messianic figure. And that's really started in Genesis. So you go from, it could be anyone. It could be any one of the descendants of Adam and Eve. Then it goes to Noah. It's got to come through Noah. Then as the book progresses from Shem, then someone from Abraham, then it's limited to someone from Isaac, then someone from Jacob, then someone from Judah, and if we go out of Genesis, we'll find it has to be someone from David, and then someone from Solomon. I don't know if you remember this, but in Ruth chapter 4, in the book of Ruth, you have a continuation of Genesis. Look at how the book of Ruth ends. These are the last verses of Ruth. Ruth chapter 4, verse 18. Now these are the generations of... Wait, hold up. That's the exact phrase Genesis uses. That's the toledot. That's the generations. That's the same structure. So what is the author of Ruth telling you? He's saying, hey, remember Genesis? Remember the search? Remember the game of Guess Who? Well, we're about to put down some more faces and eliminate some more people, because now we're going to find out that the Messiah, the seed of the woman, is going to come through David. And so it's just picking up on what happened already. So if you're not aware of what Genesis is saying, you're going to miss that connection in the book of Ruth. And so we find out that Ruth continues what was begun in Genesis. But even further, if you get to the Gospel of Matthew, and you go in the New Testament, it's the first book of the New Testament. How does Matthew begin? It says this in Matthew 1:1, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Really, it's almost like Matthew is saying in Greek, Matthew, or the book of the Genesis of Jesus Christ. And so he's connecting. What does he do? He gives us a bunch of genealogies in Matthew chapter 1. Really, what he's doing is he's saying, hey, remember all those genealogies? Remember all those connections back in Genesis and through the Old Testament, connecting who the seed is? Well, I'm here to complete that story. And finally, you finish the game of Guess Who that's been going on through the entire Old Testament. You've put down a lot of names, you've eliminated a lot of people, and finally Matthew says there's only one face left. There's only one name left, and that is the name Jesus. And so we begin the New Testament knowing who the seed of the woman is. It is Jesus. And so Matthew is the genesis of the New Testament. It begins with the word for beginning. And Matthew completes what Genesis began. And so this is the great structure of the book of Genesis. And it shows us why it's so significant. Here's another structure for you if you want to simplify the book of Genesis, okay? There's just 2 points in this outline. This is the one I memorized in seminary. You have chapters 1 to 11 refers to 4 events, 4 major events. What are those events? They are creation, the fall, the flood, and then the Tower of Babel. So chapters 1 to 11 recount 4 events. Then chapters 12 to 50 recount 4 major people, 4 people. So you got 4 events, 4 people. The first person is Abraham, then Isaac, then Jacob, and then Joseph. And that's the book of Genesis. 4 events and 4 people. I'm going to give you another structure, though, and this is the structure we're going to use to walk through it. And it's just going to kind of walk through the book in a different way. And I'm going to use 7 points to walk us through the book. Why 7? Well, because God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. 7 is a key number in the book of Genesis. So let's walk through the book, and I want to give you a reading strategy for the book. So, chapter 1. Chapter 1 is the beginning of creation. These are all going to be C words, okay? The beginning of creation. Chapter 1. Let's read Genesis 1:1. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Chapter 1, verse 1 tells us of the immutable creator and his creation. And then we encounter the initial circumstances on day 1 after God's initial creative act. Verse 2, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, we don't have a fully formed doctrine of the Trinity yet, but notice just some things that are fascinating. You have God, or you might say the Father, in verse 1, and how does he create in verse 3? Through his word. Let there be light. Well, Jesus is known as the Word. And notice in verse 2 even that the Spirit of God is hovering over the surface of the water. So creation is a Trinitarian act of God. A Trinitarian act of God. Now this verse 2, go back there, it says the earth was formless and void. Really, verse 2 is kind of like a parenthesis. It's a parenthetical statement to verse 1. It's saying, Moses is saying, here was the state of the creation at the very beginning. It's not saying there was pre-existing matter. No, it's really describing the condition of the world after God's initial, original act of creation on day 1. This is like part of day 1. God will, from this initial state, form and fill the creation. God is going to form and fill in the days of creation. And so here's something that's fascinating and helpful in the structure, the beauty of God's creation. Really, this unformed and unfilled terminology is going to match the first 3 days and the second 3 days of creation. The first 3 days of God's creation are acts of forming. It takes care of the disorganization and it organizes spaces. You have day 1 organizes light and darkness. Then day 2 refers to the upper waters and the lower waters being separated, sky and sea. And then day 3 are the lower waters and from the dry land. And so God makes land. He separates really the watery surface from dry land. And so you have these 3 days of forming what is unformed. And it refers to spaces. And then in days 4, 5, and 6, God then fills those same spaces. What fills light and dark? Well, day 4, sun, moon, and stars, the light givers. What fills the sky and the sea? Well, that's day 5, the fish and the birds. That's where they go. And then what fills the land? That's day 6, the land animals and man. And so you see that days 1, 2, and 3, and days 4, 5, and 6 actually correspond with one another. And it's been pointed out that this wasn't just for memorization, but this has meaning to it. Moses intends for us to learn theology from this. And what do we learn about this? We learn that God is in control of the earth and all its fullness. That's what Psalm 24:1 indicates to us. All of it is his. Nothing is outside of his sovereignty. He owns it all because he's the creator. We also see that God is the one who determines even time. You have these statements, one day. This first day, he says one day. He defines time. God not only tells us this happened in a 24-hour period, but the way that he writes it and describes it indicates that God is the one defining time. He's defining what a day is. And so God's creation then is in 6 literal 24-hour days. Here's something else that's fascinating about the creation. You have this statement, and God said, and it's given 10 times. God said is spoken 10 times. And of course, we could make a connection to John 1:1 and how God created through his word, right? And that would be significant. But notice also that later on in Scripture, God will use this 10 formula. In fact, in the plagues on Egypt, how many plagues are there? 10. 10. Why would that be significant? It's because God is trying to tell Egypt, I am the God of creation. I rule this world. And so he gives 10 plagues to match the 10 times he spoke creation into existence. Or how about later, when God gives the 10 words in Exodus 20? We know them as the 10 commandments. Why 10? Well, actually, all the 10 commandments relate in some way back to creation. And so this is God's law, which reflects his character. And so it's connecting back. So this is why you need to pay attention to the basic math in Genesis, because it helps you to see why things are done later. So we have Genesis 1 and 2. And you're wondering, how are we possibly going to make it through this book at this pace? But we got to spend some time here slowly and then pick up the pace later. So Genesis 1, verses 1 and 2 is really a summary. And then chapter 1, verses 3 to 31, it really unpacks how God did it, how he did it. And it goes through the days of creation. And then on chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, we have really the seventh day, which connects with chapter 1. It's God's rest. But then in chapter 2, verses 4 to 25, Moses puts the microscope on the 6th day, particularly the creation of man. And so that's what we'll see next. But on the 7th day, God rests in chapter 2. It's not because God is tired, but because he's finished. And really what you find, it's fascinating. Every single day of creation has this statement that repeats. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. And there's evening and there's morning the second day, and so on and so forth. But on the 7th day, there is no statement of evening and morning. Why is that? Well, it doesn't mean that it wasn't a 24-hour day. Of course it was. But the theology is that this day is meant to be a perpetual day. In other words, the day that God rests is to be a perpetual rest. God is showing us something about his intention for all of creation. On the 7th day, he sanctifies his entire work of creation, and he intends for there to be a creation rest. Here's where we get this concept of rest, an Edenic rest, God's kind of rest. And of course, we're going to see that this state of creation that was intended to go on forever and ever, even in our work there would be rest, that it's lost by Adam and Eve. And ever since then, man has been seeking to get back to that Edenic rest since the fall. How do we get back to God's rest in God's place with God's presence? And of course, the rest of the Bible will tell us that. So this is the beginning of creation. The beginning of creation. That's chapter 1. Then we have the beginning of the co-regent. The beginning of the co-regent. What is a co-regent? Well, a co-regent is like a co-ruler. It's one who rules on behalf of another. And this is what God designs man to do. Man is created in God's image to rule over creation on his behalf. You have this in Genesis 1, verses 26 to 31. And really, here's God's plan for man. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created a male and female. He created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And so God gives them these creatures or gives them the plants for food, and he's blesses everything and says it's very good. So what is God's intention for man? Well, it's for Adam to rule, and this is important, pay attention to this, from the earth and over the earth. Okay, remember that. We're not going to work through that in Genesis, but it's going to come back later in our future studies. That God intends for Adam to rule from the earth and over the earth. And this is the pattern for man's reign over the earth. This is God's intention. He wants to create man to rule over his creation. What's the purpose of his planet? Well, the purpose is for man to rule over it on his behalf and show his glory. All right? For there to be a successful reign of man over the creation, over this creation. Okay, so that's really what we have here in the beginning of the co-region. He sets man in the garden to rule over it. And of course, we see that furthered in chapter 2. And we really focus in a little bit more on man. We have the creation of man in verses 4 to 7. And then we have the context that God places man in chapter 2, verses 8 to 14. He places him in a garden and has him to work it and to keep it. Those are actually terms later used for what the priest would do in the tabernacle. And then there's a command given to man in verses 15 and 16 to keep it and to guard it. And he's to eat of any fruit that he wants, except for the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so that's what you have. And of course, he brings woman and he gives her to man. She's actually not named Eve yet. She's named Isha. Man is Ish. And so she's the woman. She's corresponding. She's a helper to him. And so this is the beginning of the co-regent. And the co-regent, Adam, is given a helper to help him in this task of subduing and having dominion over the creation. That's God's purpose for the planet. But sadly, that purpose is thwarted, at least temporarily. And here we see the beginning of curse. And this is in chapter 3. Here is the origin story of sin. Really, it's Eden Gate, we might call it. We are introduced to the serpent who is satanically indwelt. Satan seeks to attack God's purpose for man. He goes after the God-ordained hierarchy. It's interesting, when the serpent is speaking to Eve, he uses the plural because we learned that Adam was standing there right next to her the entire time. Why isn't he talking to Adam? Why is he talking to Eve? Because he's trying to usurp the authority that God has placed in Adam to lead his wife, to lead this woman. And so he's going against that. And Adam is just standing there letting this happen as he misuses God's word. There's a confusion of gender roles that God has established. And so we know the story. Really, Satan sells them a demotion as a promotion, as one person said. It's like one of my professors said that it's like a used car salesman that says, oh, this car has the best anti-theft system. There's nothing like it. And you're like, oh, that sounds good, until you find out that the anti-theft system is that there's no engine in the car. No one's going to steal this car because there's no engine in it. And so he's saying, hey, you'll be like God. Well, they were in the image of God. And so he's selling them a lie. And so, of course, they eat, and it brings sin into the world. They immediately know that they have sinned and have guilt, and the image of God is then distorted. And what is the result of this? Well, man can no longer successfully fulfill God's purpose for him to rule from and over the creation in God's place for his glory. And God brings a curse as a result of sin. It affects creation. It affects man. And it's going to affect everything. And notice even the beginning of the concepts of blessing and cursing already in Scripture. God had blessed the creation, but now there is a curse. And that's a significant theme throughout the Scriptures. And of course, there's curse for the serpent. There's implications for Adam and Eve, and of course for the creation. And so this is the beginning of curse. But then this leads to the beginning of the serpent crusher. The beginning of the serpent crusher. This is the this first promise that God gives in Genesis 3:15, even in the aftermath of sin. And this is so significant. This is one of the most significant passages in the Bible. Genesis 3:15, here's what it says. I'm going to read this in the Legacy Standard Bible. It says, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel." Now, you might, so there's a few people here. You have the woman individually and the serpent individually, but then you have those who will come after the woman, people that are related to the woman, and then you'll have a people related to the serpent. And then you have another individual, he, and we're not expecting that. It kind of comes out of left field. "He shall bruise you, the serpent, on the head, but you, the serpent, shall bruise him on the heel." And so what do we learn here? Well, who's the only other he in existence at this point? It's Adam. Adam's the only other he. There's Adam and Eve. And so this can't be Adam because Adam's already blown it. He can't fix this problem. God is promising a different he. So this is what we might say a new Adam. This is setting up for that theology of Paul that there's a new Adam that has come, a new representative for a new humanity. And so this one will crush the serpent and his work. And this sets the trajectory for the rest of the storyline of the Bible. The only other, he is Adam, so this has to be a new Adam who can break the curse and return us to Eden. But the victory of this hero will come at a cost. There will be pain involved. The rest of the Old Testament is really then the search for the seed of the woman. Every good story has a hero. We love heroes. And this is the introduction of the greatest hero of all time. The seed of the woman. Now, we don't know a lot about him at this point, but we are beginning to have concepts that associated with him. We have this concept as well of corporate solidarity. That might sound like a scary word to you, but really just means that the one represents the many. We get this with our politicians. One politician may represent a big group of people, and the decisions that they make are really binding on that person. And so the king represents his people. And so that's what we see even established here. The seed of the woman will be related in some way to the seed. There's a corporate seed, a people, and there's an individual seed who will be related. And that's going to get developed a lot in Scripture. And so that's important to remember as well. So Adam and Eve, did they believe this promise? I mean, people wonder that. Did they believe after this? What happened to them? I think they did believe. I think they did believe in God's promise. Why? Well, because Adam then, after this, names his wife Eve. This is where she gets her name Eve. It's not before the fall into sin. It's after the fall. And really, it indicates that she is going to be the mother of the living. Verse 20 of chapter 3. "Now the man called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all the living." He believes in this promise that there will be a seed that comes from Eve, from his wife, the woman, who will restore the creation. Eve herself seems to believe in this promise. In chapter 4, verse 1, it says this in 4 verse 1, "Now the man knew his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. And she said, 'I have gotten a man with the help of Yahweh.'" Now, another way to translate this that may be even better is to say, "I have gotten a man, even Yahweh." It seems that Eve thinks that this is the promised seed, and that she even associates him with Yahweh. That this will not only be a man, but this will be God himself, the Messiah. And of course, we can understand why she might think that. She doesn't know how long it's going to take for this promise to be fulfilled, but it seems that she thinks that God is going to prove faithful to his promise. And so what happens? Well, we know it's not Cain. Why? Well, because he murders his brother Abel. She's mistaken. And what do we see also here? Satan has a plot. Satan knows God's plan. He has heard this promised plan as well, and he wants to thwart it. And so what does he do? Well, he has Cain to kill Abel, and he attacks Abel, and Abel is killed. And then Seth is born. And what does Seth's name mean? It means appointed one. So still they think, okay, it wasn't Cain, it wasn't Abel, but maybe Seth, maybe this is the appointed one, one God is appointed as the seed of the woman. Well, they're hopeful, but it's not Seth. Adam bears children, we learn in chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, after his own sinful likeness. That's going to be a problem. How do we overcome this sin that Adam that's imputed to all of Adam's descendants and inherited? Well, others think that we learned of the expectation of the seed figure early on, because even when Noah is born, his father seems to think he might be the seed of the woman. In chapter 5, verse 28, it says, "And Lamech lived 182 years and became the father of a son. Now he called his name Noah, saying," listen to this, "This one will give us rest from our work and from the pain of our hands arising from the ground which Yahweh has cursed." Now, two words there, they're significant: rest and pain. The Sabbath rest that was lost, they want to get back to that. And the pain that came from the curse, he's thinking this one can reverse it. So they're hopeful that maybe Noah will do this. And Noah's name means rest. That's what Noah's name means. And so it's all connected here. So this is the beginning of the serpent crusher and this expectation for him. Well, we see then this problem of sin that needs to be dealt with, and we have the beginning then of catastrophe. The beginning of catastrophe in, really, we'll just say chapter 6 to 9. Chapter 6 to 9, the beginning of catastrophe. The world becomes incredibly evil at this point. And there's another satanic plot introduced in chapter 6 of Genesis, verses 1 to 8, as Satan is really using demons here and coming to the daughters of men, and this corrupting plan to affect God's promised plan of the seed of the woman. Well, God then indicates his intention to flood the earth because of the evil of man. And there's a worldwide global catastrophe that's coming. And Noah is tasked to build an ark to deliver he and his family. A flood serves as a judgment, really, and a restraint upon evil. It's also a kind of cleansing of the earth. It's like a bath for the earth. The flood is like the great reset, we might say. There's similar language to the original creation after the flood. Language like sky and sea. Language like water receding and dry land appearing. Language of be fruitful and multiply. And so it's almost like it's like a reset of the creation after the flood. And there's even an indication of some level of rest after the flood. Noah even plants a vineyard as his first task. And that's going to be significant for later. It has garden imagery, but not only that, later on, we're going to have this imagery of vine and fig tree, sitting under your vine and fig tree. So God then makes a covenant with Noah and all creation in chapter 9. We call this the Noahic covenant. Shocker. This covenant is not a saving covenant, but it's a covenant of stability for creation. The Noahic covenant provides the stability of the creation so that the rest of God's promised plan can be fulfilled. Think about it like a foundational covenant made with all creation, believer and unbeliever alike. But despite the flood, sin remains. And Noah gets drunk after planting this vineyard. One of his sons shames him before his brothers. And as a result, there's a curse placed upon Canaan, which that even hints at the coming conquest of the land of Canaan. So it's setting up for future things. And so now we're introduced to nations. And this is our next point in chapters 10 to 11. This is the beginning of confusion. The beginning of confusion. We learn that God has a plan for all the nations of the earth. But man in his fallen state, sinful state, will only come together to rebel against God. The Tower of Babel is constructed or attempted to be. They want to make a name for themselves, it says. Babylon is the same word for Babel is the same word for Babylon. And of course, we know later in Israel's history, they're going to encounter a nation named Babylon who will take them into exile. And then even at the end of world history, in the book of Revelation, in chapters 17 and 18, we learn about a future form of Babylon that will come together again at the end and will be destroyed by God. And so really we see here that if man has the opportunity, he will unite in a common purpose to rebel against the Creator. And so God in an act of mercy separates the nations from one another so that his plan can play out. He scatters them by confusing their language. The nation will now fight against each other. God's plan is then able to continue to progress. Now let's just take a pause here for a second and think about, if we fast forward for a moment to Acts chapter 2. What is happening in Acts chapter 2? Well, this is after the resurrection and the ascension of Jesus, and Jesus tells the disciples to wait for the Holy Spirit to come, to receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. And in Acts 2, it's the day of Pentecost, the day of first fruits. And what happens? Well, the Holy Spirit comes, and the result is that the disciples speak in tongues. They're given the gift of languages, and they speak in all these different languages. And there's people there for the festival that speak different languages, and they're hearing their own languages spoken. And so what do we see connected? Well, we see Genesis 11 and we see Acts 2 connected. God used languages to divide the nations in Genesis chapter 11, but the birth of the church is a reversal of Babel. It's a reverse Babel. And so God unites the church, a new people, a new humanity from all nations as a first fruits of his plans. They're born on the day of first fruits, the festival of first fruits. It's as if God is saying, really to Israel, here is my new humanity, my new people. And this birth, this beginning of this new institution, the church, is the institution for this age that we live in between Christ's first and second coming. And they are the first fruits. They're a taste of things to come for Israel and the nations. They're almost to woo Israel and say, make them jealous so that they turn and experience those blessings as well. Well, we see how God unites the world, different nations in the church as a first fruits of his plans. But we go back to Genesis and we say, okay, well, if God has now scattered the nations from one another and yet has plans for the nations, how will he accomplish his plans for those nations? Or even more significantly, how will he communicate to those other nations? Well, we're going to see that play out. God is going to establish one nation to be a witness to the other nations. And so he chooses Abraham to establish what will become the chosen people of Israel. And this is our final point for the book of Genesis. It's the beginning of the chosen people, chapters 12 to 50. And this final section of the book, yes, is quite long, but it really breaks down into three major sections with three major lessons. I know I said there was four major people, but really we could break it down even more simply. You have Abraham and the lesson of faith in chapters 12 to 25. And then you have Jacob and the lesson of God's presence, which is a big focus, from 25 to, or really you could say 26 to 36. And then you have Joseph and the lesson of God's purpose to turn evil to good in chapters 37 to 50. Let's just survey these quickly. You have Abraham and the lesson of faith in chapters 12 to 25. God begins his people through one man, Abram. He's a pagan. He's from Ur of the Chaldees. He's brought out of Chaldea, which is interesting because later Israel is going to be sent back to the Chaldeans, to Babylon in exile. It's like, hey, Israel, because of your sin, you're going to have to go back to the beginning. It's like playing a board game, and all of a sudden you pull the card that says you got to start over again. And that's really what Israel has to do later in their history, back to where it began with Abraham. And so Abraham is set forth as a believer. God gives him promises. He calls him out of his land. He tells him to go to a land that he will show him. And in Genesis chapter 15, verse 6, we read this. Then he believed in Yahweh, and he counted it to him as righteousness. This indicates that he had an enduring faith, that when God first called him, he believed, and he continued to believe in his life. And so God counted it to him as righteousness. We see the beginnings of the doctrine of justification here in Genesis, where God declares sinners to be righteous in position because of their faith in his promise. Well, God then makes a promise or a covenant with Abraham, known as the Abrahamic covenant. And we see that introduced in chapter 12, and then it gets reiterated a number of times in chapter 15 and 17 and other places as well. It's really we call it a unilateral covenant and an unconditional covenant. Why do we say that? Well, because God is going to fulfill this no matter what. He's going to fulfill it no matter what. And this covenant involves a number of features. We read in Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3, Yahweh said to Abram, go forth from your land and from your kin and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. Notice what he promises to him here. There's a few features. You have a place or land. To the land I will show you. And verses 5 to 7 will make this clear that this is the land of Canaan. Then there's a promise of people or a seed, a great nation, he says. I'll make of you a great nation in verse 2. Verse 7 says, to your offspring or to your seed. And really, this has multiple facets to it. Seed, it can have really 4 different reference in Scripture. It can refer to the physical descendants of Abraham in general, the physical descendants of the promise. It can refer to Jesus Christ, the seed of Abraham. And then later it can refer to Jew and Gentile believers in Christ who are basically children of Abraham because they believe like Abraham believed. Now, we have to be careful to notice the context, and it doesn't mean all of these at the same time in any context. We have to see it means one of these, and one doesn't cancel out the other. But we see here that there's a promise of a people, a seed. And then there's a promise of, we might say blessing, or we could put it in a P and call it protection and presence. Verse 2 says, I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I'll curse. And so he's showing them favor, that he's going to show to favor to them, fertility, prosperity, protection, preservation. God, you see this in a small way, and historically, God protects Sarah in Genesis 12 and in chapter 20, even when Abram lies, and God blesses Israel, even in Egypt. He continues to bless them. He's going to make Abram's name great. And now think about this. This is exactly what the builders of Babel sought to do for themselves. In chapter 6, verse 4, and chapter 11, verse 4, there was this seeking to make their name great. And this idea of a great name will also appear in the Davidic covenant. God is saying, hey, man is going to try and make a great name for themselves, but I will make you, Abraham, a great name. And he's going to do it through the Davidic covenant and the Davidic king. And so finally, we might say a program that God has in the Abrahamic covenant. It's blessing for all the nations. Israel is not an end in itself. They are means of blessing the nations. What God does for Israel is what God intends to do for all the nations. And so they become a witness nation to the other nations. The idea of blessing occurs 5 times in verses 2 to 3. And really think about how this matches up with the 5 times curse is used in chapters 1 to 11. It comes up 5 different times. And so we see this idea, once again, of blessing and cursing. Really, one writer said this, God will use the blessing of Abraham to counter the curse of sin, which was prominent in the first 11 chapters of Genesis. Well, if we move forward, we see Abram and Lot, they separate. We see then that Abraham has to rescue Lot from being kidnapped. And in the midst of that, Abram in chapters 14 and 15 is introduced to, and we are as well, to this figure named Melchizedek. He's kind of a mysterious figure. He's a king, and he's a priest, and he's a king over Jerusalem, over Salem. And his name really is King of Righteousness. So you have all these different aspects to him. He sets up a paradigm for us. And Jesus is going to be a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Jesus is a king of righteousness. Jesus is a king and a priest at the same time. And where do you think Jesus will rule over? Jerusalem. And so we see all these things coming together later, but it's being set up here. God cuts a covenant then with Abram in chapter 15, and that's where it actually happens, where he has Abraham cut these animals in half and separate them, and the 2 parties were to walk through these animals that were killed, like down an aisle, and it was an imagery to say, if I break my covenant, then let me be like these animals that have been killed. But before they both walk through, God and Abraham, God puts Abraham to sleep, and God passes through through some imagery there as he manifests himself. And so what you see is God is communicating to Abraham, I'm going to fulfill this no matter what. The Abrahamic covenant will be fulfilled. I don't know if you realize this, but likely the imagery of a bride walking down the aisle to her husband is modeled after this idea of making a covenant. That's the seriousness of marriage. You're making a covenant like they did in the past. And so there are various problems, though, to the faith that the faith of Abraham faces. He has to face the fear of man in chapter 13. He has to face the passage of time as he waits for God's promise in chapters 15 to 21. He faces the facts of life in chapters 18 to 21 that I'm an old man, I can't have children anymore. What am I going to do? And of course, Abraham tries with Hagar, his servant, but God is saying, no, it's going to be through Isaac. And he allows this special, miraculous birth of Sarah having Isaac. And God fulfills his promise, beginning that seed promise. And then faith faces the perplexity of God, because after Isaac is born, God then, as he grows up, tells Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. And we see that Abraham trusts God and fears God. And he even believes that God will raise Isaac from the dead. There's a hope of resurrection in the book of Genesis. He says, we will go and we will return together. Somehow, some way, even if God has him kill Isaac, God will resurrect him from the dead. Abraham has this incredible faith. And the lesson in this section on Abraham is that you must trust God to fulfill his promised plan. The plan he has for history, trust him for it. Believe in his promises, and God will grant you righteousness. We see, secondly, in this final section, Jacob in the lesson of God's presence in chapters 26 to 36. In this section, we focus on Isaac's son, Jacob. And we learn that Jacob is a schemer. He's a schemer. He's a deceiver. But God is a redeemer. God's plans cannot be thwarted. Jacob can't thwart them. Others cannot thwart them. And you have this struggle between Jacob and his brother Esau. This is significant for later. The book of Obadiah will pick up on this because Jacob represents Israel and Esau represents the people of Edom, who later represent really all the nations of the earth. And that's significant when you see the book of Obadiah much later. The prophets also will refer to Edom and their relationship to Israel. So the focus, though, of this section is on God's presence. Lots of references to God's presence in this section compared to the others. Here's an example. Jacob has a dream at Bethel of a staircase to heaven. Angels are ascending and descending on it. And the message here is that there's still access from heaven and earth. God is present. God is active. We see later Laban tries to trick the trickster with Leah and Rachel. But God is still for him, and he works it out in the end. Jacob then will later wrestle with God, and he's renamed Israel. And there's this interesting play on words as he wrestles with God. The word wrestle is Ya'avek, and Jacob's name is Yaakov. And they do it at the Yabok River. And so there's all this play on words. And of course, then he's renamed Israel. And what does Israel mean? Israel means God fights for you. This is going to be part of their identity from here on. God will fight for them. He will win their battles. And of course, we see that play out through history. God is with his people, and he will fight for them. Well, during this time, Jacob, he has his 12 children through 2 wives and 2 maidservants. And there's the foundation of the 12 tribes of Israel. And this leads us to our final section of the book, and it's Joseph and the lesson of God's purpose to turn evil to good in chapters 37 to 50. Really, there's a focus on both Joseph and Judah in this narrative. Joseph is probably around 17 at the beginning of the story, and he begins to have some dreams. And he starts recounting these dreams, and you kind of see he's kind of annoying to his brothers. He's got some issues himself. But these dreams, like we said, relate later to how Daniel received dreams about the future and God's plans for Israel and the nations, similar to Daniel. Also in Revelation 12, we already saw that there's that imagery there, sun, moon, and stars, and what God's plans are for history and Israel and the nations and how they fit together. Well, his brothers hate him, and so they decide to throw him in a pit. And they're thinking of killing him, but Judah steps in, and he suggests selling Joseph into slavery instead of killing him. And so he's sold, and then all of a sudden, you switch in chapter 38 to this strange chapter about Judah and Judah and his sexual immorality with Tamar. And you think, why is this here? Why is this here? And we see really his sinfulness and his lack of responsibility. And it's showing just who Judah is as a man. But then we're back to Joseph in chapter 39. And we see here he's in Potiphar's house and he's being tempted by Potiphar's wife. And yet the emphasis in this text that is keeps coming up is that Yahweh was with Joseph. You see it in chapter 39, verse 2. You see it in verse 21, you see in verse 23. It's emphasizing that even though Joseph is in this difficult place, God is still with him. He's present with him. He's working in the life of Joseph. And he spends this time in Potiphar's house, and he's righteous. I mean, he has this righteous attitude. He says in verse 9, "How then could I do this great evil and sin against God?" and he is not rewarded for his righteous acting, but he is actually punished for it. He's sent from Potiphar's house into prison, and he spends time there. And he, while he's in prison, encounters some of the servants of Pharaoh, and he is able to interpret their dreams successfully. But then he tells them to remember him when they get out, and they forget him. But then later, he's remembered, and he's brought out of prison, and he's exalted to this incredibly high position in Egypt. And so God is turning evil to good, even in the story of Joseph. And in God's providence, there's a great famine, which leads to really all these people depending on Egypt. And Joseph has made provision for the future. And they have all this grain that he's preserved. And so the brothers have to travel to Egypt to get food for their family. And so he begins to interact with his brothers, and they don't recognize that it's him. And what Joseph starts to do is he starts to focus on his younger brother, Benjamin. And you think, why would he do that? And here's likely the case, as others have pointed out. He wants to know, did you do to him what you did to me? In other words, have you guys changed at all? And he wants to know this. He wants to know, will you guys just act in the same way you acted with me when the pressure is on? And so Joseph kind of creates this situation of pressure for them to set them up in a way to see how they're going to act with Benjamin. And so what we see in this is that God has been working on Judah all along. And we see this climactic moment in chapter 44. And, Jacob is hesitant to let his son go. And so here's what Judah says in chapter 44, verse 44, 32. 43, verse 8. 43, verse 8. Then Judah said to his father Israel, "Send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die. We as well as you and our little ones. I myself will be the guarantee for him. From my hand you may require him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then I shall bear the sin before you all my days." You're like, whoa, what a change in Judah. And we know that Judah is going to be the one whose tribe is going to be the royal line. His line will be the king. And so here we see Judah offers himself as a substitute. Really, this is going to set up for what the character of Israel's ultimate king will be like. He will lay down his life for his brothers. He will be a substitute. And he will have it counted to him if anything happens. And so this is amazing. This is just beautiful how God has worked from not taking responsibility in chapter 38. Now Judah takes full responsibility for his brother. And so as the brothers are reunited, Jacob is then dying. Joseph has revealed himself to them. And Jacob then blesses his 12 sons and makes prophecies about them. He makes prophecies about them. And really want to focus on Judah here for a moment. Judah has a significant promise in chapter 49, verses 10 and 11. Turn there, 49, 10, 11. In chapter 49, verse 10, here's the prophecy for Judah. It says, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. He ties his fowl to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes his garments in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are dark from wine, and his teeth white from milk." What do we learn from this amazing prophecy? Well, we learn that this one will rule. This descendant of Judah will rule. The scepter, that's the staff that the king has. It won't depart from Judah. The ruler's staff between his feet. And so this one will rule. Also, we learn that this one will restore the nations to God. It says, "And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples." This is in contrast to chapter 3 when Adam and Eve disobeyed. This is in contrast to chapter 11 in the Tower of Babel when the nations disobeyed. But now the obedience of the peoples are given to this individual, this ruler, this king. This is eschatological. This is future. This is what the Messiah does after his second coming when the nations are restored and brought back. This one will also reverse the curse. He'll reverse the curse. Listen to what it says. He ties his fowl to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. We saw already that Noah planted a vineyard after the flood, but this vine language is amazing because what's going on here is you wouldn't tie your donkey to a vine. It would rip it apart. It would pull away easily. It would be like, using like dental floss to hold your horse. It's just like rip it apart. And so you've got this amazing productivity of the creation, such that a vine that normally couldn't hold a donkey is going to be so massive because the productivity of the creation. There is a reversal of the curse, a turning back of it, a rejuvenation of creation. And there's this imagery here. These aren't suggestions for you to wash your garments in wine or to, a teeth whitening procedure, to drink a lot of milk. But this is just imagery used to say that there is so much productivity that wine is like water. I mean, you could wash your garments with it. And there's just so much milk. I mean, you're just going to drink so much of it, it's going to make your teeth white. And so it's just this imagery to say there's just so much productivity. It's a rejuvenation of creation, a reversal of the curse. And one other thing this one will do, he will bring rest, or we might say he will bring peace. And that's what his name means, until Shiloh comes. Until Shiloh comes. Shiloh relates to the word for peace. He's the peace man. Solomon is a precursor to this. He pictures what the Messiah will do, and his name is Shlomo, which relates to Shiloh, and it relates to peace. And he is going to be, later revelation, the Prince of Peace. And so here is this incredible prophecy of what is coming, what God has promised. We learned in the very beginning of the book that the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. There's an individual, a new Adam. We also learned that he's going to be a ruler. We learned in Abraham that kings would come from Abraham. And so here is this king, this ultimate king who will rule. He will be a sacrificial king who will lay down his life for his brothers, and he will restore the nations, rejuvenate creation, reverse the curse, and bring the rest that God always intended on that seventh day to be a perpetual rest. And finally, now we come to chapter 50. God's work in the Joseph narrative is really then a sample of what God intends to do for the entire story of history. In Genesis 50, verse 20, as his brothers are being reunited to him, "As for you," Joseph says, "you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to do what has happened on this day, to keep many people alive." And so what do we learn here? God can turn evil to good. In fact, his entire plan has factored in evil. God ordained this way. And he's going to show, not only in a small way, in a microcosm, in the story of Joseph, that he can turn evil to good providentially, but God will do this in the entire story of history. This is what God is telling us from the beginning, that his plan for all of creation and all of history is going to be one where the evil of sin introduced in the garden will be overcome, and he will bring good out of that evil. And we see that in the cross of Christ in Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 4, that God has ordained it such. He has predestined it this way, that through the sacrifice of his son, a great evil, he would bring about the greatest good. This even answers to us in part the problem of evil as we think about it. And so God does it as a sample for Israel in the Joseph narrative to show what he's going to do in the rest of the story of the Bible. So Joseph dies then in Egypt, but asks for his bones to be preserved and taken later to the land that God promised. He's believing God's promise. It's a hopeful note. And now the 12 tribes, the 12 sons of Israel are left in Egypt. We've seen that God begins. But what will happen next? Well, they're stuck in Egypt, and they need to get back to the land. And that's where the book of Exodus will come in. Really, we're left saying, we have to go back. We have to get back to the land that God promised. And that's where we'll see in the book of Exodus. And that is the book of beginnings, the book of Genesis.